Welcome to this session organised by the Scottish Union for Education. So I work on the Substack of the Scottish Union for Education. My name is Penny Lewis. And this is being conceived as a sort of cross-border collaboration of the best and the worst kind. We've gathered together people working in Scottish education to talk to you a bit about our experience. Some of you will be Scots, but some of you will be facing a new curriculum designed by the Labour government in England. So we thought it would be quite useful to share our experience with you. SU, the Scottish Union for Education, is approaching its second anniversary. We actually began because we were encouraged to have a meeting in Glasgow by Claire Phillips in the Battle of Ideas. We organised that meeting mainly because we wanted to talk about the decline in standards in Scottish education, but it became very clear very quickly that a lot of parents wanted to join us and they wanted to talk about sex education because the experience of COVID had been that they'd suddenly realised that things were being said to their children which they had not expected. And since then, we've done a lot of campaigning around the introduction of gender ideology in Scottish schools, mainly because the campaign for gender recognition has been led by the Scottish government, and then they funded a whole flurry of so-called campaign groups, which are really arm's-length government campaigns, to talk to children about gender in a way that really, to a lot of parents, is wholly inappropriate. My own children were subjected to the new curriculum for excellence, so they kind of pretty much their secondary education coincided with the introduction in 2010. And my son kind of was probably one of the last pupils to go through the final year of primary school with a teacher approaching retirement who decided that she didn't want to teach anymore, but while she taught him about discipline, about intellectual discipline and how to organize yourself in the approach to secondary year. By the time that my daughter got into the final year of primary, the curriculum for excellence was truly embedded and was obviously influencing teacher training. And the teacher that she got was a newly qualified teacher who thought that her final year at primary school was really about entertainment more than anything else. So I have very direct experience of it, but we are in touch with a lot of people that have had much more experience of the new curriculum. Our general feeling is that in the period from 2010, the idea that the curriculum should be child-centred and therapeutic had a really considerable impact on the way in which conventional learning skills and activity developed. And then probably from around COVID onwards, that kind of collapse in ideas of what teaching was about and what the teacher-child relationship might be gave way to a sort of vacuum that allowed for a highly politicized environment to come to play. So you'll find people talking about, a particularly problematic experience that we've had in Scotland, where our unopposed SNP government has felt that schools are the place to change society through ideological campaigns, sometimes which they initiate themselves and sometimes which they invite other people to do. We've got a great panel to talk to you about this. We've not got a great deal of time, so I'm not going to go through their CVs because it's online. The first speaker is Kate Deeming. She's a parent and she's the campaign organizer for the Parent Activity for SU, and she's built an incredible network of parents all over Scotland in various different groups through WhatsApp and meetings and other activities that all in different ways are trying to challenge what's going on. The second speaker, Julie Sandilands, is a teacher with many years' experience both teaching in Scotland and in England, and she is part of the process of attempting to establish a framework for teachers, which is more difficult, more challenging, because they're obviously in a difficult position in terms of speaking about their experience. But she's going to talk to you about the curriculum. And finally, Stuart Wayton, who's really been the driving force behind the group. He's a sociologist and author and has campaigned on issues for a long time, trying to push back against Scottish Government's attempt to interfere in ordinary people's lives. And this is the sort of latest campaign that he's really championed. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Kate, and she's going to talk for about 5-6 minutes. And each of them going to talk for 5 or 6 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for discussion. Kate.
Hi there. Thanks so much for coming. Well, what I want to say, and I say this quite unironically, is what I think we're witnessing in Scotland is a Maoist assault on the lives of our children through our education system. Now, before my son went to school 7 years ago in the Scottish system, I'd worked for 30 years all over the world in educational settings, including in Scotland. And I expected, like many parents, that my child would go to school, learn some nice things, and his life would expand with what was happening within that environment. And how wrong I was. What quickly transpired is an instinct that all was not well. In particular, in his reading and writing levels, I questioned the school that he didn't seem to be where he should have been in his reading and writing. And I was constantly told that he was on track. I don't know what this track was or where it was going. Was he going to be a drug dealer? I'm not sure. But it was not clear what this track was. So at a certain stage, I took the bull by the horns and I had him independently tested, and I found he was P2 level in P5. So he was 3 years behind what children should have been based around certain standards. So that was one thing. Now, you'll all be aware of the ideological programming coming into our children's lives, and this is absolutely rife in Scottish education. We have the comprehensive sex education that Penny referred to, which is ideologically driven, is driven by queer theory. We have the critical race theory programming coming in, being embedded into our schools. We have inclusive education being embedded. We have eco schools. We have the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, where schools become rights-respecting schools. And I'm not even finished yet. Where is he going to actually learn math? The things that are obvious probably to all of you is that these are not politically neutral programs. Not only are they not politically neutral programs, but they are also not age appropriate. These programs treat our children like adults in small bodies, and we could see this in how the teacher training has developed over recent years, where teachers are no longer tethered to the idea of childhood. They're taught that they are there to make our children into activists. And this is very clear in how the school lessons are rolled out within Scottish schools. The other thing that I would like to point out is that they're just really awful and badly designed and boring programs. So just from an artistic level, they offend me. There is no criticality of these programs. They receive massive amounts of funding from the Scottish government. I tried to approach this with my son's former school. Around this time, they made a policy in the school that you were no longer able to directly approach your child's teacher. Any problem you had to be directed to the head teacher. So I was handing my child over into the school environment where I had no knowledge of what his teacher even looked like for 30 hours a week. And when I had a problem, I had to email the head teacher, at which time I was pulled into an Orwellian level of bureaucracy, meetings, and obfuscation, at which time lots was said, lots of paper was generated, and nothing changed. At the same time, he got an activist teacher who had been ramped up on decolonizing the curriculum. My child happens to be the minority white boy in a predominantly Muslim school, and I started getting loads of calls saying that he had somehow done something racist. These things would vary from him doing an accent to looking at the teacher in a funny way. At the same time, he was targeted by a group of older boys who were older than him, Muslim boys, who made up a lie about him saying something about the Prophet. and they proceeded to get all their friends ramped up on it, chased him into the toilet where he was assaulted. But for his friends who were also Muslim, because he was well liked and in the school and never had any problems, his friends stood up for him. And they said he did not say that. Those boys made that up. And because of that, the school had to recant. On my son's school record, it says that the boys were play fighting. And yet on the same record of my son's, that by this activist teacher, there's a whole array of accounts of racist things he's done that were unknown to me until I did a subject access request. The final nail in the head was when he got physically, the school refused to deal with this. The council refused to deal with this because it wasn't alongside the ideological framework that they were embedding in the school. I went to the quality improvement officer and she said, I said, I want you just to teach my children regular stuff, right? Teach them to read, teach them math. And she informed me that the program of Scottish education was creating children into global citizens. So at the time I came across Sue and I started writing for Sue. And since then I've met hundreds of parents who have similar stories to what I've experienced in my son's own school. Part of what they do is they isolate parents so they do not talk to other parents or organize with other parents. We have 12 groups and we are organizing and making ourselves more knowledgeable and making change and trying to address the things in the schools. Adults need to wake up to their obligation to provide for children. This is a really scary situation, what's happening in Scotland. And if we don't address this, the very foundations of our society will crumble. And I don't know what the future will be like. Anyway, yay. So don't do it.
Okay, thank you. I think in order for other nations to understand what has actually gone wrong with education in Scotland, it's worth looking at the experience through a series of questions. And the first question is, what preceded the curriculum for excellence and did it work? Scottish education before CFE was split into three parts. We had the 3 to 5 curriculum, the 5 to 14, which was the board general education, and then we had the national qualifications. And they were made up of standard grades, intermediates and higher examinations. Was the system perfect? No. No system ever is. Was it fit for purpose? Yes, it was. And in fact, Peter Peacock, the then Minister for Education and Young People in 2004, actually stated on record, the curriculum in Scotland has many strengths. It is well respected and the national qualification structure have been carefully designed to meet the needs of pupils at different stages. And Mr. Peacock was correct. The exam system was structured to allow even those of the lowest ability, for example, what we used to call a foundation general student, to leave school having completed a 2-year course, an internal assessment and 2 formal examinations that were externally assessed in about several subjects, giving them credible qualifications to go on to college and employment. I'm going to contrast that today with the replacement qualification for those students, which is a National 4 qualification. And this is a 1-year course with a handful of in-house marked assessments and no formal exams whatsoever, in an average about 4 to 5 subjects. So the first lesson that can be learned, this is just one example where the actual reality on the ground is a far cry from the government's rhetoric of raising standards, which they said was to close the poverty-related attainment gap, prepare children and young people for their future. That was the key aim of the implementation of Curriculum for Excellence and the justification for complete change. Question 2. So who and what drove the change? Well, in 2002, the Labour McConnell-led government held a national debate. And whilst at the same time Mr. Peacock was praising the existing system, he insisted that the Scottish people had overwhelmingly wanted a different curriculum that would fully prepare the children for adult life in the 21st century. be less crowded and better connected, and offer more choice and enjoyment. Well, as you can see from the example I've just given you, the polar opposite happened for those ability students. So after the public debate, national debate, the government set up a curriculum review group in 2003. And the remit for this group was not to write a curriculum. It was to identify the purposes of education, something that is very, very different. And this is where the origins of curriculum for excellence is often misunderstood. In fact, when you're talking about curriculum for excellence, you need to differentiate between the two. There is the paper, the document produced in 2004 by the Curriculum Review Group, and then there is the curriculum that was launched in 2010. The 2004 document was only 8 pages long. And Keir Bloomer, he was one of the original participants in the review group, explained that it didn't have detailed content and it was more of a mission statement. It certainly was not a curriculum. But then what happened was the Labour government set up a new curriculum review group and did not ask any of the original participants to sit on the new group. And as Keir Bloomer actually noted himself, this was done with people much more dominated traditional figures from within the Scottish education establishment. So for those wielding power, Labour, and then from 2007 it was the SNP, this newly formed development group created an opportunity to use curriculum for excellence as a vehicle to shape the education system, to fit and enforce their political agenda. And as Kate has explained really well, the hijacking of education in Scotland is continuing at pace. There is immense pressure from activist groups, quangos, and the government itself to mould the curriculum by embedding a range of ideologies into every thread of learning, which risks eroding the accuracy and the credibility in what is being taught. So lesson number 2. Create and maintain an evidence-based curriculum free from political and ideological bias, where open discussions about controversial subjects are actively encouraged, thereby avoiding what can arguably be seen as indoctrination as opposed to education. Question 3. What happened after the launch of Curriculum for Excellence? Well, there was a lot of clarity, despite the number of long guidance documents of what and how to teach. But the direction was to declutter the curriculum. And the emphasis was moved from knowledge-based to a skills-based curriculum. And it was becoming obvious that teachers were struggling. So in 2015, I was teaching at a secondary school, and we were advised in our first term that a number of our S1s, which are our secondary 1 students, had a significant low reading age, some as low as 7 years of age. At the same time, the international PISA results, which was the only international comparison assessment that Scotland was signed up to, was also reporting that standards in literacy and numeracy were declining. So lesson 3. Because of the lack of clarity, the lack of direction, and the move away from knowledge to skills, from the onset, provide concise objectives supported by practical, realistic teaching methodologies that teachers understand and can be implemented in the planning process and actually delivered in the classroom. Thank you. Stuart.
So I'm just going to throw out a few thoughts about the problems in Scotland. To start with, I would say it's fairly clear that the idea of knowledge education is now seen as a bad thing, which is a problem for them because obviously you need to teach something. So how does this pan out? It's interesting. So there's a paper, one academic paper, this was written 10 years ago, so bear in mind 10 years ago, and a lot has declined in 10 years, by a guy called Mark Priestley and Claire Cinnamon, and asks the question: Is the curriculum in Scotland downgrading knowledge? Now you could see them bending over backwards to try and be positive about things, because just about every educational academic is kind of bending in one direction, which is against what they would call traditional kind of knowledge. Anyway, so they go on to say there's a general trend in the West to move away from specific knowledge-based content to a generic skills-based approach coupled with an emphasis on the centrality of the learner. Then they add on, the curriculum in Scotland is characterised by a lack of coherence and mixed messages about the place of knowledge, right? Mixed messages about the place of knowledge. This is a school we're talking about, right? This is not like a youth club. Rather than knowledge being at the heart of schooling, they note that the acquisition of knowledge remains only one of a variety of purposes of education within the new curriculum, rather than the key purpose that distinguishes education from other activities. And remember, this is trying to be a sympathetic paper, right? And they still have to accept this. In such a context, one might therefore argue that in reducing the primacy of knowledge in the curriculum, governments are indeed downgrading knowledge, right? Downgrading knowledge in a school. Yeah, what could possibly go wrong? Right, so a few things, and I've got 5, and I'll say, Penny, feel free to stop me at any point. So problems. Child is equal learner. Right, so in the Hayward Review, which was looking at the qualifications, independent analysis of qualifications, the paper was called "It's Our Future," and the document explains the reason it's called "Our Future." Its genesis is in a statement made by a learner. It's all learners now because we're all learners, adults, teachers, children alike. We're all learners. So the statement about "it's our future" was made by a learner frustrated by feeling that learners had little say in decisions being taken about qualifications that would impact them on their friends and their future. Right. So the title of this document is made by a child who says that he or she doesn't have that much say over the nature of qualifications. Now, perhaps there are millions of geniuses in Scotland. I'm a lecturer. I've come across a few very bright students, but not many I would expect at the age of, 14, 15, 16, to be really being able to define the nature of qualifications in Scottish education. But hey-ho, what do I know? It's our future, say the children. And of course, to say otherwise, what an animal. I must be a fascist of some description, who knows? The other added on to this, children as their own selves. I would say at the minute, the idea of self-actualization, even though we don't use the term anymore, has become the supreme ethical perspective, right? Be the real you, right? In fact, you can do engrams on this if you know engrams, they're chart words, right? Be the real you or be the real me. No one ever used to say this until about 10 years ago. Now it's like everywhere. Be the real you, be the real me. Be the real you. And if you start adopting be the real you in schools and start treating children as selves, i.e. like adults, essentially, that they are subjects rather than people who are becoming adults and need leadership and direction, that is a complete abdication of responsibility in terms of what education is and what the role of adulthood is and what the role of authority is. So when people say they're child-centered and think they're being caring, actually I think they're being cruel, right? And they are dumping masses of responsibility onto children, even to the extent that they call their documents after things that children say and then try and hold them. It's almost as if they're responsible for the developments of the new curriculum, which to me is cruel and infantile. Which brings me on to my next point, which is I think we are creating an infantile generation of teachers.
Stuart, 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay, so this is my third point, so I'll leave 4 and 5, which are the more exciting ones. I think we're creating an infantile generation of teachers who are likewise being encouraged to think that they're being their true self is what the world is about. And the best example of this is there was an advert a few years ago, and it was a teacher, well, not a teacher yet, but he had a 9 to 5, right? 9 to 5, that's bad, apparently. So 9 to 5, actually, it was a job that has time, discipline, and so on. 9 to 5, that's bad. His job is awful. seemingly because it was with grey men in suits. Right? So what do you want? You want to be a teacher. And what they did was they would show them having fun with the kids. And the whole idea of the advert was that to become a teacher because it'll be fun for you, right? Not become a teacher because transmitting the knowledge of generations of people throughout history, being able to inspire children with your expertise, right? Being able to commit to something that is not about you, that is above and beyond you. That's not what a teacher is about. It's about having fun with the kids. And if that's the message we're giving to trainee teachers at any level, education, not just in Scotland, but more generally, is in serious trouble.